Hi, my name is Rebecca Malatesta. I'm a professor of psychology at Oakland University in Rochester Hills, Michigan. I'm also the psychology student success coordinator, and my primary focus is on ways to obviously encourage and facilitate student success. So one thing that I was looking into is reducing barriers to access, or just reducing barriers to success. And one potential barrier is access to course materials. So I decided, as part of our affordable course materials initiative at OU, to introduce affordable course materials into a large lecture introduction to psychology class. So this class can range anywhere from 75 to 200 students. And so what I did was I historically had used traditional publishers textbook materials and then switched it over to a free textbook and low-cost supplemental learning tool. So what I found was that with respect to the traditional materials, students were with the textbook and the supplemental learning tool. And I also used iClicker, which was our classroom response system, which was really was the classroom response system that I chose to try to increase engagement in these large lecture classes. That all combined, that students, the cheapest version with an ebook, the supplemental learning tools Launchpad, and the iClicker, that it cost students $138. So when I sort of started learning about the open educational resources and the low-cost course materials, I thought, why not give it a try, just at least check it out. So I went and I spoke with a librarian at OU, and they recommended that I look at a number of different options. And there were quite a few for an intro to psychology class. And I landed on one called OpenStax Psychology 2E. I landed on this because it had a lot of overlap with the traditional textbook that I had used. And it also seemed to cover, it was clear, it looked accurate, it was really great. And it didn't require too much modification to my prior class because the topics were pretty much the same, and the way that the material was treated was pretty much the same. I also selected Lumen Learning's Waymaker tool, which was very similar to the Launchpad tool. It's a supplemental tool that has embedded videos, quizzes, etc. So I used that. I also wanted to keep the classroom response system, not so much for, recording quiz grades and making sure students attend class, but basically just for engagement, and also to kind of help students see where they may be having issues, as well as to show me where I might need to increase the amount of information I'm giving, where they might be having some challenges. So I switched to Kahoot. The downside is that there's a limited number of students who can access it. So I just had them pair up, and students absolutely love this. Anyway, the savings per student, because the only thing they had to pay for was the supplemental learning tool, the savings was $102 from, compared to the traditional textbook. I had 125 students, so total cost savings for the class was about $13,000. And if we were to, the university was to use the use the textbook for all of our introduction to psychology classes, all Psych 1000 classes. We had 420 enrolled in the fall of 2022. We could save about $43,000, which is great. So how did I implement this? The free and low-cost materials. They were made online. Students were given a direct link to the textbook on their Moodle page, as well as a link to purchase the Waymaker via our bookstore. And then Kahoot quizzes, like I said, were used in place of iClicker quizzes. Super easy to use, a lot of fun. And then I used the textbook and the supplemental tools as is. I could have modified them. I may in the future to maybe beef up some sections that I thought were maybe less well developed, very few, but I used it as is in the fall of 2022. I also found that integration with our LMS was seamless. In terms of the assessment, I did my own assessment initially, informally, looked at the content, looked at the quality, or what I perceived as the quality. And I also wanted to get students' perceptions. So I created a Qualtrics survey, and I took items from the textbook assessment and usage scale, the MSU Libraries OER student feedback survey, and I created other questions and added some demographics. The questions asked about textbook usage, perceptions of the content of the textbook, so clarity, coverage, diversity and inclusion, the impact of the cost of traditional textbooks, and demographics, like I said. I also collected performance data for a comparable class that I taught in the fall of 2021 using traditional textbook and compared it with the 2022 fall class that used the low-cost materials. So I'll talk a little bit about that. I had asked students at the end of the fall 2022 semester, the class that used the low-cost materials, to complete an assessment survey or complete a survey, Qualtrics survey. Of the 125 enrolled, 101 responded, which was fantastic. So I had a good representation. I also collected performance data overall for the fall 2021 class that used traditional materials and the 2022 class that used the affordable materials. Overall and cumulative final exam grades were investigated. In terms of the demographic data, they were 74% identified as female. They were primarily Caucasian, and most were freshmen, which wasn't surprising as this is an introduction to psychology class and a prerequisite for other classes within psychology. It's also a general education class. In terms of the impact of cost, what I found is that 76% of the students said they paid $300 less on textbooks every semester. 50% said the cost has kept them from buying a required textbook. So 50% aren't buying all of the materials they need. And only 25% of the students said they always purchase the required textbooks, which is pretty low. And then in terms of the impact on their purchases, anxiety, etc., 45.5% said that the cost of textbooks made them anxious. 32% said it caused them to cut back on non-necessary purchases. 13% said they had to cut back on necessary living expenses. And 10%, roughly 10%, said it caused them to make late payments on these expenses. So it's pretty troubling. In terms of textbook usage, approximately 44% said they use the traditional textbook 2 to 3 times a week or daily. Only about 30% said they used the OpenStax Psychology 2E open educational resource. And I was a little worried at first, but then I realized that students were also using the Waymaker Lumen Learning tool. And that included a majority, 90+% of the material from the textbook was embedded in their study plans, which was part of the Waymaker tool. So students seem to be opting to use the Lumen tool 2 to 3 times a week or daily, and which meant that they were reading the textbook less often. And the data supported this. 74% said they used it 2 to 3 times a week or daily, and that's reflected in this table. In terms of students' perceptions, students reported positive perceptions related to content, images, figures, examples, and inclusivity. The items for all of the items that were evaluated were on a 5-point scale, and majority had a score of 4 or higher. So the textbook presented the information accurately. The mean was a 4.24. The 1 was strongly disagree, 5 was strongly agree. So most students agreed with the statement, and most, like I said, were either above 4 or approached 4. In terms of overall performance, the fall 2022 class, using the low-cost course materials, it was comparable to the fall 2021 class. So you can see here, the distribution is similar. There are some differences, but they're very, very similar. And then the cumulative final exam, there were no differences between students' performance on the cumulative final. They both had an average of 72% on the final exam, and the distribution was very similar. On the left is the traditional, on the right is the low-cost materials. In terms of students' overall impressions. They expressed appreciation for the free textbook. 25% went out of their way to add a comment. Things like, I think it's amazing. I appreciate it when professors understand that some students aren't able to provide themselves with the money to afford these resources. So very, very appreciative of the free textbook and low-cost learning tool. Overall, the textbook was well received by the students, covered the material accurately and comprehensively, and resulted in a similar level of performance as the traditional textbook. There were a couple of minor issues. For example, the bookstore had some confusion about the access codes, but that was resolved quickly. And some of the concepts, like I mentioned, very few weren't as fully developed as the traditional textbook. So my recommendation is, if you can use affordable course materials to reduce barriers to access, we should do this, right? It was an easy transition. It didn't require much work on my part, but the payoff was significant. The pilot study for my fall 2022 class was significant in the sense that, based on these results, our department has decided to switch all of our introduction to psychology classes to free or low-cost course materials, which is fantastic. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed. Please let me know if you have any questions.